welcome to this webinar today. This is the launch webinar for the Royal Statistical Society's Statistics in Sports section's annual prediction competition. So it's something of a game of two halves. We're going to start by reviewing the previous iteration of this competition, which was based on the Women's World Cup in 2023. So we'll tell you about that competition, and we'll hear from some of the participants from previous years who will share the secrets of their success with us, hopefully. And then we'll move and look forward to this year's competition based on the Paris Olympics. And so we'll have a panel discussion at the end with those previous winners, previous entrants, and our sponsors. And again, hopefully share their top tips and the secrets of their success with us. So first of all, then, a bit of a history lesson. The Statistics in Sports section has been running these prediction competitions for a few years now. So the very first one happened in 2021 with Euro 2020. So that was predicting the outcomes of all the games in the men's Euro football competition. The following year, we moved our attention to tennis and asked participants to predict the results of all the possible matches that could happen in Wimbledon 2022. So both men and women there. So that was interesting, and there were some interesting differences between doing football and tennis and the men's and women's. So that was a really interesting competition. And then last year we kind of put it all together, and we got people to predict the outcomes of all the matches of the Women's World Cup in 2023. So a return to football, but with a focus on women's sport instead. So as I say, we've got some of our fantastic entries from last year to speak to us today. So just to give you a really brief overview of the rules for the previous competition. So like I say, the goal of the competition is to make predictions of the outcomes of every game before the tournament kicks off. That's really important. Entrants are free to use any data that they wish, as long as it's publicly available. We ask people to share the code and the data and so on that they use to generate their predictions, so that we can try and replicate those results. You can enter either as individuals or as teams, and we've got examples of both with us today. You can change your mind as much as you want before the competition kicks off, but then the most recent one is taken as your entry. And there are 3 prizes available. So in this competition, there was an overall winner, so the person with the best log score. So that's what we use to judge these prediction probabilities. And then we had 2 other prizes that were chosen by a judging panel. It was a bit of a combination between how well you did, the log score, and then also if people had used interesting methodology. So the methodology prize was, okay, maybe you didn't win, but you'd used some interesting methods that we'd love to hear more about. And then similarly for the student prize, again, based on the student that did the best, but also we wanted to hear and see interesting methods there. And the rule is that at least one team member, or if you're a solo person, you have to have e-student membership of the RSS to win that prize. What is the prize then? Well, of course, the most important prize is the honour of winning this competition and doing very well in it. But the physical prize, I suppose, is that you are invited to present your work at the following RSS International Conference, and the expenses and the pass to the conference, that's all provided through the Royal Statistical Society and then the sponsor, which last year was Smart Odds. So as we say, at that conference, we heard from these 3 winners, and it was a fantastic session. So part of the purpose of today is to have a record of that and those fantastic things that those people said on that day. So we'll hear from them in a moment. But before we do, as I said, there's a leaderboard. You get a log score based on all your predictions. And this is a time series of how those predictions were going. So we can see that if you're at the top, you're winning. There was really a top 4 that emerged, okay, as we can see represented here by MP, TH, MOK, and BP doing really, really well. Then there was a bit of a best of the rest kind of group underneath them, but they were really our front runners. And like I say, we're hearing from most of those people today. So it was getting really close towards the end. And if you look carefully, I've got a bit of a zoom in, you can see that as we drew towards that final, There was kind of a consistent pattern going, but then look at that. MP just came through right at the end and took it from TH. So, like I say, the results then were our overall winner was Matthew Penn, MP, who's going to speak to us today. The winner of that methodology prize was the person in purple there who just got pipped to the post right at the end, Tom Haynes, TH. The student prize was that MOK entry. That was a team, but the person who's going to speak to us today is the student member of that team, Reuven Michaels. And then we've got honourable mentions too. You saw BP there. And also we've got Kato or KG with us, Team KG with us today, who's also going to tell us about what fantastic things they were doing as well. So we're going to start with Team KG, our honourable mention. If you would like to tell us a little bit about the method that led you to do so well in the competition last year, please.
Okay, thank you, Jess. So I have prepared some slides and can I share my screen? Is that possible? Not sure
Yes,
if
please.
I've got the rights to do it. Can you see my screen? Yes. So thank you, Jess. And yeah, so as Jess has mentioned, this launch event is about looking about the past and looking into the future as well. And I'll prepare some slides, and these slides more look into the future than in the past. So yeah, today I'm presenting gambling odds to outcome probabilities conversion. So the outline, I will cover 4 main topics today. We're short on time a little bit, so it'll be quite brief. So the first topic is the problem with converting gambling odds to probabilities. So gambling odds have been quite a useful resource for many of the high performing solutions in past years' RSS competitions. And the most common way to convert gambling odds to probabilities is using the multiplicative conversion. So multiplicative conversion is basically normalizing the inverse odds. So as you can see here, Olympian A, Olympian B, Olympian C, for example, the betting odds of getting a gold medal is just say 1.2, 3.4, 5.6 respectively. If you use multiplicative conversion to convert these probabilities, which is basically normalizing the inverse odds, you'll get something like 63.8%, 22.5%, and 13.7% respectively. And now, unfortunately, the true probabilities will be something like this. It will be something like 77.5%, 17.5%, and 5%, respectively. This is just an example. But what I wanted to emphasize in this example is that when you use multiplicative conversion to convert betting odds to probabilities, you end up underestimating the probability of the favorite winning, as you can see between these two. And also you overestimate the probability of the long shot winning the gold medal, which is these two here, Olympian B and Olympian C. And this is called the long shot bias, which implies that the expected loss for rare outcomes, which is the long shots, in this example will be Olympian B and Olympian C, is larger, in other words, worse for gamblers and vice versa. So this is what invalidates multiplicative conversion's assumption that all outcomes have the same expected loss for gamblers, because as you can see here, so what this basically means is that if you gamble on Olympian A to win, your expected loss tends to be much lower than if you were to bet on Olympian B or Olympian C, which is what the long shot bias implies. And multiplicative conversion doesn't consider that. So this is the problem with converting gambling odds to probabilities. And to the best of our knowledge, there's been 2 existing methods that attempt to convert gambling odds to probabilities while considering the favorite long shot bias, namely the Shen and power conversion methods. But our proposed method is an analytical solution, which is much more efficient than Shen and power conversion methods, which are numerical solutions. And also our proposed method is more accurate than existing methods. As you can see on this experiment table here, our proposed method outperforms all existing methods under the Breyer score and RPS for all 4 bookmakers for our 6,000 football betting market dataset. So betting market dataset was for each of those 6,000 football matches, it was either a away win, a home win, or a draw. And yeah, the full details of the experiment can be found on the GitHub repository of our proposed method. So Kaggle, which is the world's largest data science competition platform, hosts a basketball tournament prediction competition every year. And for that competition this year, I generated this probability matrix for that competition. And as you can see here, each row is a team. So Connecticut is a team, Houston is a team, and Purdue is a team, and so on and so forth. And each column is a stage in the tournament. So round 2 here, all the way to the championship on the most right-hand column. And for example, on the top left corner, you can see 97.3%. So this indicates that Connecticut had a 97.3% chance of reaching round 2. And if you go all the way to the right, you see 20.3% chance of Connecticut becoming the champion, which they did. So, and these probabilities were computed by converting gambling odds to probabilities using our proposed method. And at least 3 gold medal Kaggle solutions leveraged this probability matrix to get a gold medal, including my one. And yeah, again, the full details behind this can be found on the GitHub repository of our proposed method. So using that idea, like I mentioned at the start, this presentation more looks at the future rather than the past. So you can actually make a similar probability matrix for this year's Olympic medal table prediction competition. So on each row, you can have each nation. So United States, China, Japan, and so on and so forth. So it'll be about a 200 row matrix approximately. And on column, you'll have a column for each sport. So you can have men's basketball, women's basketball, and we'll go on and so forth for about 50 or so columns, I think it was, for Paris 2024. And on each of these cells, you have the probability. So for example, on P11 here, this is the probability of the United States winning a gold medal in the men's basketball. And P12 here is the probability of United States winning gold in the women's basketball, and so on and so forth. And you'll have that for each sport. And if you were to take the sum of each row, you'll get the expected gold medals for each nation. So if you sort that this probability table in descending order of expected gold medals for each nation, then you can use those rankings to submit for this year's RSS Olympic table prediction competition. So yeah, thank you RSS for hosting this exciting competition every year. And thank you again for having me.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing your real inside information for the competition this year. I'm sure I certainly enjoyed hearing that. So thank you very much. Okay, we'll move swiftly on to our next speaker. So we'll move on to the winner of the student prize. So speaking on behalf of Team MOK, if you'd like to take away when you're ready.
Yeah, thank you. Try to share my screen. So you should see everything now, right? Perfect. So first of all, thank you for having me here again, because last year was really a nice experience in the competition, and also in person meeting you all was really great. I will now go one step back from Kaito's presentation, because I won't speak too much about the Olympics, because I think what I did is not like that transferable. But however, I will share what I've did last year, what we as a team did last year, and how we achieved the students prize. So our motivation was like, okay, women's football is like increasing. Here that is the UEFA Women's Euro in 2022 in England, where the attendance rose in sky highs, and which was quite of a motivation to look into the scores of women's football, because yeah, the history of modeling scores is long, but it's restricted to men's football. So beginning with the model by Meyer, the double Poisson model in 1982, was quite the starting point of modeling scores. Based on this, some other models followed. I don't want to go into detail to all the other models due to time constraints here, but we've seen a lot. But what we've seen in women's football does not fit to men's scores, and this is also the reason why we depicted these scores in more detail. So essentially what we're seeing is, so this is a plot from the German Frauen-Bundesliga, so it's a national league, that we see an underrepresentation of 0-0 draws, which is stands in contrast to the men's football. And we see an overrepresentation of high wins for the home team as well as for the away team. And this was, as I already mentioned, completely the other case in the Dixon and Coates model, or in what Dixon and Coates found 1997 in their seminal paper, because they only found 0-0s and 1-1s to be overrepresented, and like the non-diagonals 0-1 and 1-0 to be underrepresented, which is why, I will show that later, they shifted probabilities between these scores. However, apart from these 4 pairs, so to say, every other score was quite in the range of independence between home and away goals. And beside the fact that we saw this like dependent structure in the scores, we also saw over dispersion in the data for all leagues which we depicted, which also rendered us again to look into the models a little bit more closer. So what did we do? Our idea was to extend the Dixon and Coates model, which is this model. So briefly speaking, changing probabilities from an independent model to inflating the diagonals and deflating the off diagonals. And what we found is like, okay, there's a family of distributions, so-called Salmonov family, which inhabits all probabilities mass functions and Q functions, such that the expected value of this Q function given the probability mass function is 0. And then we can define such a joint probabilities mass function, which is essential for modeling scores, because you have to imagine that x1 is the home score and x2 is the away score. And this part here specifies the dependence between home and away scores. So what we relatively easy saw is that the Dixon and Coates model was like part of the Salmonov family, which was quite nice because, well, I put here this plot, and if this is part of the Salmonov family, obviously we have enough space to fill, and that was what we did, not only with the main goal to model women's football, but first of all, to just extend and see, okay, what is possible, what might be helpful in modeling scores. And with that, it was like, the first was, okay, let's change the intensity of weights, which stresses just the diagonals even more and deflates the off diagonals. Or let's just extend the whole thing to scores up to 2 and don't restrict ourselves to scores 0 and 1. Or, for example, to just take different marginals. So, for example, here for the home scores, we inflate up to scores 2, and for the away scores, we let them only inflate up to 1 and use the classical Dixon and Coates model. So that was like the first extension we did. The second extension we did was when we thought about, okay, we have like this over dispersion, and if we use Poisson marginals as Dixon and Coates, then we might not be able to catch. The Poisson just assumes mean equal to variance, and this was the reason why we extended the model to negative binomial marginals. However, if we go one step back, you can directly see that the Q function has to fit the probability mass function. So if we change the probability mass functions, we have to change the Q functions such that this is still fulfilled. And that is why we came up with this function, was quite the equivalent of the Dixon and Coates model in negative binomial cases. And finally, what we then did is like to shift probabilities across the entire support, because we didn't want to restrict ourselves to any number S where we change probabilities, because we have seen in the data that 3-0, 4-0, and maybe also 5-0 could be a little bit overrepresented. So we didn't want to restrict ourselves, and for that we found in the literature some Laplace transform which we used, And based on this function, we extended it a little bit more flexible and found the so-called, we named it ANS function, alternative negative binomial Salmanov, where the part in the front is a little bit flexibilized in contrast to the Salmanov model. So that was like what we did from a methodological standpoint. And okay, here's a plot. I will go over this due to time constraints. And then we applied this to women's football data for several leagues and included home effect and attacking and defensive parameters of every team, and found when we compared it with the AIC that our model or our new generated model performs very well in 3 or 4 leagues. Only in England another viral distribution was preferred. And when we double checked this in an out of sample check, where we did like a half season approach and the rolling window approach, our results were quite confirmed, especially in 2 or 3 leagues, which we think was quite okay. So now I've speak a lot about what we have done. Just quick discussion. I mean, we have seen that we have flexibilized everything, but for future research, it would be interesting to include further covariates, which is quite difficult in women's football because the data is not that rich as in men's football. And another research goes a little bit more into like a sports economics side to elaborate the drivers of the different structures. For sure, heterogeneity is the driver, which is also why we think that these models can be applied to other leagues, to lower leagues, for example, where you don't have the data as well as like in the Premier League. But we also thought about, okay, maybe it's also due to the fact that women's football has less pressure. So if the score is like 0-0, they can risk more and don't have to fear, okay, I've got chased when I lose. But this is something for future research. That's still our thoughts. Quick, coming back to the prediction contest. So that's what we calculated last year prior to the tournament, and it was quite interesting. So Spain was the winner of the tournament, but I think we were one of the onlyest I saw on Twitter who had Spain that high, and especially Germany that low, which was a little bit strange for me to cheer not with Germany in order to our model being good in the competition. But well, at the end, it was worse with a nice trip to England, so I'm okay with what happened. Hopefully, in the Euros starting on Friday, it will change a little bit. Okay, so far from me, these are my references. Our paper is on arXiv, and yeah, thank you very much for setting this up here.
Thank you for that. That was great. Well condensed. But if people want to see an extended version, you did actually, as a celebration for the competition last year and to kick off the Women's World Cup, you presented an extended version of that, and so people can watch and see that you were at that time we were talking about you putting Spain so highly. So yeah, absolutely.
Could also have been a little bit fast with the distribution and shifting and so on and so on. So if you want to have a look, just look in the paper, just look in the recorded things from last year, or just drop me an email. I'm hoping to for interest there.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I'm going to switch the order up a little bit now and go into our overall winner last year, who also had a fantastic method. So, Matt Penn, do you want to tell us about your winning method next, please?
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Jess. Let me just share my screen. So hopefully that's come up. Can everyone see that? Yep, great. So yes, so predicting the Women's World Cup. Obviously, there's 100 different ways of going around this, and the competition was very close. And so I'm not sure you can necessarily definitively say that this is the best method, but this was the method that I used in this competition. So to start with, there we go. Just a very brief intro about me. So I'm a final year PhD student at the University of Oxford, and also work as a data scientist for Como 1907, who are a team in Serie A in Italy. And the model that I used is based off some very simple maths. So if you look at the list that Reuven showed in his slides, he went through all of these different developments. in football prediction modeling, and the one that I use is kind of right at the top. So the earliest of these models, originally developed by Maher in the 50s and 60s. So it's the double Poisson model. Essentially, it just assumes that goals scored by team A against team B are Poisson distributed. You get these offensive strengths and these defensive vulnerabilities for each team. And essentially, all you're trying to do in the data fitting stage is estimating these different team strengths. And so to do this, of course, you need some data. And I found data from a few different sources. There's an excellent Kaggle page with competitive international results from 2020. And alongside that, I added friendlies from footystats.org to make sure we had a fully rounded view of all of the teams. And so that gives us around 1,400 matches for around 180 teams, which is not an amazing ratio. And so that means that fitting all of these parameters can be slightly difficult. The most simple way of fitting them is just using maximum likelihood distribution. So you just try and end up solving these equations, which essentially tell you that you're trying to make sure that in your data, the expected goals scored by team A were equal to the actual goals scored, and similarly for conceded. And some notes about the implementation of this are in this paper, which we wrote after the first iteration of the RSS competition. And now, in this case, we work out that the strongest country is in Europe. In fact, the strongest country is in the Iberian Peninsula. It's all looking really good. And then we discover that the strongest country, according to the model, is the Basque Country, with Honduras in second. And now, meaning no disrespect to either of those, that struck me as deeply unlikely to really be the two juggernauts of women's football. And so that kind of leads us to the question of what went wrong. And the reason for this is that the Basque Country only had 2 matches in our data set, a very impressive 1-0 win against Argentina and a 0-0 draw against Venezuela. And Honduras also only had 1 match. And the fact that neither team conceded a goal means that their maximum likelihood estimate of their defensive vulnerability was 0. And so therefore the model thinks, well, I know these teams, they never concede. And so therefore they must be the strongest teams in the data set. And of course, we could just kind of wave our hands and go, well, we'll remove all the teams with only 5 or 10 matches or whatever threshold we use. But then we've still got that fear in the back of our minds that maybe something is still going wrong. And really what's happened here is that we've ignored quite a big part of uncertainty in making our predictions. So statistical models in general have 2 main sources of uncertainty, aleatoric and epistemic. So aleatoric uncertainty describes the intrinsic randomness of a process. If I flip a coin, I can be very sure it's 50-50 that it'll be heads or tails, but I cannot tell you whether it's going to land on heads or tails. So that's the aleatoric uncertainty, and that is captured in the model. Epistemic uncertainty is what we've ignored. So that's our uncertainty in the model parameters. So in our case, because the number of data points per parameter is reasonably small, this epistemic uncertainty can play a really important role. And so to deal with this, we need to, rather than try and get a single point estimate for the parameters, we need to try and get a distribution for each of them. And we can do a simple MCMC fitting to do this. A couple of kind of technical notes here. The model parameters aren't uniquely defined, even if we have perfect data. If you make all of the teams better at attacking and less vulnerable in defense, then that will cancel out. But overall, it's relatively simple to implement this fitting, and that gives us much more reasonable results. Again, another issue that can come into play with this model is that weak teams end up having, matches against weak teams end up having a very high weight in the likelihood. What you can essentially show is that if team A plays against teams, oh dear, that's gone very wrong. If team A plays against teams with defensive vulnerabilities of 9 and 1, then if we just think back to those maximum likelihood estimations, they would satisfy that kind of 9 plus 1 times their offensive strength is equal to their goals scored. And what that means is that if they beat their weaker team 10-0, then that's going to have a big impact on this offensive strength compared to if they only beat them 5-0. Whereas actually, if we think about kind of how we would assess teams when we look at them playing, if England beat Gibraltar 10-0 and if France beat them 7-0, we're not immediately going to go, well, England are a lot better than France at attacking. And so in order to mitigate this, only the top 100 teams were included in the fit. A final consideration is that home advantage is important in football. Ideally, probably you would create a separate pair of parameters for teams, whether they were at home or away. But given our very limited amount of data, you remember we only had about 6 or 7 matches per team. This would add in kind of substantial extra epistemic uncertainty. Also, most matches are at neutral venues anyway, and so we'd only be looking for the matches for the co-hosts, so that's Australia and New Zealand in this case. And so following this paper by Peters and Van Owers, you can simply, I've done it again, you can simply just add a certain factor to the expected goals scored in each game by Australia and New Zealand and subtract that from their expected goals conceded as well. And then a final, and this really isn't good modeling, you can also clip the probabilities for these competitions. If you predict a result with 99.5% certainty, you've just got that fear in the back of your mind that it's going to scupper you. Although, as I found out, this actually just made my score worse, kind of forcing all of the results to be at least 1%, 2%, or 5% in these different cases. So just a quick summary of the results. Once we've now done our MCMC fitting, the top teams, according to our model, look a lot more sensible. So we've got the United States, unfortunately for my model, didn't do very well in this tournament, Spain, England, France, Germany. And then even as we go all the way down, these teams seem a lot more reasonable than the Basque Country and Honduras. So that's showing that our model has been able to learn some better information from considering the uncertainty in the parameters. We can also assess the model. So in particular, we can compare our expected goal difference for each team against the actual goal difference. We can see that there's a reasonably good fit here. Pulling out a few specifics, Australia and New Zealand, who, remember, we adjusted their expected goals based on home advantage, actually both outperformed this even with that adjustment. So their actual goal difference was higher than their expected goal difference. So possibly there's an extra impact in tournament football. Home advantage is stronger, although that would need more consideration. The big differences, United States and Italy were the biggest underperformers. Nigeria and South Africa were the biggest overperformers. And actually that links to a little bit of a pattern. If we look at all of the African teams here in blue, we see that kind of universally, with the exception of the very slight underestimate of this blue dot, universally they were kind of underpredicted. And that's probably due to the fact that women's football in particular is very quickly evolving. Lots of countries around the world are getting stronger. And our model looks too far back in order to adjust for that growth. Yeah, you can compare all of the different variations that I've talked about here. So your model with MCMC fitting, your model with home advantage, etc. Sadly, there's actually very little difference between all of these. We could have just used the very bog standard model and our score would only have been slightly worse. But I think, yeah, you know, it shows you again the very small differences between these scores, that there is a lot of randomness, and it is at least mostly luck as to who wins. And in fact, kind of just to end, talking further about this randomness, under the model derived here, our expected log score of the model was 41.2. If we look back, no one got 41.2 or even close, not even the bookmakers. And under this model, there was only a 2% chance of getting a log score of greater than or equal to 52.5, which is what it ended up with. And even the bookmakers model, if you kind of go through each of their predictions, they only had a log score of 46.9. And so what all of that suggests is that this World Cup really did contain quite a number of genuinely surprising results, which made that tournament and also the RSS competition highly unpredictable, but also highly exciting throughout. So yes, there are many ways in which this model could be extended. We could use a better model than the Poisson model. We could do better home advantage analysis. And you could also kind of introduce updating by the fact that if, for example, in the scenario in which South Africa made it to the knockouts, probably their strengths are towards the higher end of your distribution, and that may make the model better as well. But thank you very much for listening. And yeah, I'll hand back to Jess.
That was great. Thank you very much. I was just trying to quickly work out that when you were saying it wouldn't have made that much difference to your score, but the competition was close. So would you have still won if you?
I would have just about still won, but it would have been even closer.
Brilliant. Okay, so we'll move quickly on then to our final presentation. So the person that very, very, very narrowly got beaten, as we say, Tom, would you like to present your fantastic method that won the Methods Prize? So something completely different.
Sure. Let me share. Hopefully that's visible to everyone. Everyone can hear me okay. This goes. Yeah, so the method that I used was to use gradient boosted trees to do my predictions in order to classify each potential match as being the likelihood of it being a home win, an away win, or a draw. My plan for this was I was trying to keep them simple. I wanted an approach that was flexible so I could test different models and have a pipeline that allowed me to sort of go through various iterations pretty quickly. And wanted something that wouldn't overfit a solution, and just an opportunity to, try and practice some good coding techniques and things. So I settled on using gradient boosted trees as a method for this, but that required that I prepare an input for it. So using, I think one of the international results data sets from Kaggle was able to put together a data scraper that would calculate things like ELO, and then convert each match in that series into the team's ELO scores, what type of match it was, what they'd scored, and what the two teams had scored in the last 5 games. And so the input for the final looks something like this, where you can see 2 ELO scores, match type, world rankings, which I'll come back onto later, and then the goals scored for and against in the recent matches. And like Matt was just saying there, this is the kind of thing where, looking back now, these are very static. This is the impression of all of the teams at the start of the tournament. Fair enough, for the group stages, this is probably quite representative, but once you get to the finals and stuff, it's very clearly not the same last 5 games, and those, that kind of current performance indicator, that could do with being updated. From memory, when I did some sensitivity analysis on this, the model was less reliant on these parameters, so it may not have had as much of an effect as it could, but certainly, if there's a surprise team doing well in the group stages, their performance prior to the tournament is probably not the best indicator for their performance in the knockout stages. So once I'd encoded all the matches, I was able to dump them into the XGBoost model, which is great, not a model I'd used before, but something I wanted to try out, something you see frequently used in Kaggle data science competitions. Very easy to use, very little pre-processing, so I'm not having to do any scaling of scores or anything to get nice values between 0 and 1. Can kind of just throw pretty much everything in there, including categorical variables like the match type and things. And what's nice about it is that when you're training this model, it's not just trying to sort of minimize the difference between your predicted and actual values, but also there's this term in there that penalizes over complexity in the model. So just another way of trying to prevent sort of overfitting creeping in. Very quickly on how it works. The trees are formed trying to maximize this similarity score within the residuals. So as each leaf is formed, it's looking at whether, when you split out a branch, are the 2 leaves that form from that, do they have a higher sort of similarity of the residuals in between each leaf than from the root? If not, it won't create that branch. So again, just a way of not trying to introduce spurious branches and things, and sort of allow individual results to sort of have an outsized impact on the solution. And this lambda term, which comes in both calculating that similarity score and lambda score, again, the output value for the leaves is, as you increase that, you're reducing the effect of individual results on your overall solution. So again, trying to prevent any particular upsets and things rocking the model too much. The parameters that I was messing around with, mostly the number of trees that I would allow the model to use, how deep they would go, so how many layers there could possibly be, and the learning rate being the scaling factor to how much we allow the output of each tree to change the current sort of prediction. I used a hyperparameterization tool, CV grid search, to kind of iterate through tons of values of these. So rather than sort of doing the smart kind of pick, derive the best parameters for stuff, just chuck a lot of numbers at a computer and let it do the calculations for me. And that resulted in a model which had max depth of 4, 60 trees, and a learning rate of 0.1. Then as means of a review of performance, having a look at how the model did and what the predicted win rate was compared to the actual win rate. We can see their teams that have been mentioned several times before, both the USA and Germany. I had over predicted their performance within the tournament. I think remembering back at the time, there's a lot of press to indicate that it was a known thing the USA were likely to underperform in the tournament. Something I'd like to try and include in future models is that ability to tweak things based on sort of known circumstances, possibly outside just the the CSV of past football results that might influence things, which I could see being particularly important for something like the Olympics, especially with the way the scoring is going to go. Those smaller nations where one or two, a single gold medal can massively change their position in the tables. Those things are probably going to be key and possibly quite difficult to pick up in a model. All very interesting. But yeah, there's a lot of teams like England did pretty well, Spain did pretty well in terms of predicted win rates. But yeah, it was these outliers that I think cost me quite a bit. So in a part of the sort of post-mortem of my model, looking at the team rankings, which was one of the inputs to my model, I'd done some spot checks at the time. So I'd looked at England and they were ranked number 1, seemed sensible. France, number 2, seemed sensible. What I hadn't done was look at it the other way and see what is the complete table. I'd looked at teams that I had and what was their rank. Because when I looked at the ranking table, I had West Germany in 3rd, which was clearly not an ideal thing going into the 2023 World Cup. What had happened was essentially, although I thought I'd done it, I hadn't capped like how far back I would look in terms of calculating rankings. It was supposed to cut out after like 4 years of no matches. It hadn't. As a result, the overall rankings, like relative, they were still correct, but in terms of the actual number, they were shifted because there were some countries in there that shouldn't have been in there. Which meant, yeah, I was training it with incorrect team ranks. And then just to torture myself, I had checked if I had the correct rankings, I just scored 58.1. And if I had no rankings at all, I would have done a fair bit better and scored about 52.45. So indicating that ranking was not a good feature to have included in the model. And yeah, testing is important and not just spot checks. Look at more overall things. What would I do in future? Look for a better control over the home advantage, either using a separate indicator, because not all of the matches, especially with internationals, the home advantage is less clear. It's not all like the team listed first is not necessarily guaranteed to have a home advantage like you'd expect in a Premier League match or something. Maybe look at running predictions both ways, because and then average between them for these kind of neutral games, or have a separate marker for them. Yeah, a bit more steps to include overfitting, just various model parameters you could tweak, drop the ranking feature, and then allow for manual updates last minute. Where does common sense overtake these things? I'd add to that now, looking back, yeah, if there's investigate ways of doing that kind of, maybe split it into group stages and knockout stages, like assuming that given that somebody has got to the knockout stages, their performance probably isn't or may not have been how you expected it before the tournament, especially for some of the kind of wild card teams out there. Yeah, that was it. Like, really enjoyed taking part in the competition. Keen to give this one a go. I think it'll be quite different, and so far I haven't found quite as neat a data source as a single list of all the tables. I mean, all the medals are there, but I don't know if that's going to be enough for this competition. So yeah, thank you very much.
So thanks very much to all the speakers for telling us all about how they approached last year's competition. So now we're going to move on and start thinking about this year's competition, which we've already started to do a little bit. So I'd like to hand over to Ben Powell, who's going to explain how this year's competition, which is a little bit different, is going to work. So Ben, whenever you're ready, off you go.
Thanks, Jess. I'll just try to get the share screen working. Okay. So I've tried to open up the website for this year's competition, which will help me describe a few things. So this year, I think Jess and I and the rest of the statistics in sports section, we thought we'd shake things up a bit. Like, people were getting a bit too good at the competition. They were predicting probabilities quite well, and they were doing quite well in the log score. And I guess as the viewers, everyone watching this will know that the log score has got some interesting connections to your sort of log wealth if you are a gambler. And you can make use of betting odds to inform your forecasts, and you can use a lot of pre-existing models that say minimize something called the cross entropy in machine learning world, which is the same thing as this sort of log score for the forecasting competition. So this year we've got a competition for which you can't really use these tools, or you've got to adapt them significantly. This year we're looking at predicting a ranking after, say, the whole of a tournament, in this case the Olympics, finishes. Our metric this year is something called Kendall's tau, which used to appear in statistics textbooks, where it was used as a sort of a bit like an alternative to a t-test. It was sort of more robust because it used the rankings of different observations rather than the values of observations themselves. So we're going to use Kendall's tau to compare the true ranking medals table with forecasted medals tables. And the details of this score are on the website here. It's actually quite simple, really. It involves looking at each pair of countries or national Olympic committees that are taking part and looking at whether your ranking, putting one team above another, matches the real ranking in the real table. So you get a point if you get a pair of teams in the right order, you lose a point if they're in the wrong order, and if there's a tie either in your predicted ranking or in the real ranking, get no points. Okay, and that's it, really. That's how we're going to go ahead, and the submission template is here, downloadable on the website also. We've also got some details of the prizes, which will be the same categories as last year. Our prize last year was sponsored by SmartOdds. This year by Amelco, and Milton Mark are going to tell us a bit more about the company and what they're up to in a bit. We've also got the leaderboard and the medals table from last year all ready to go. So it's going to be quite exciting when things sort of get moving, and we can see people go up and down this leaderboard. So we're going to be ranking the rankers, and then, yeah, meta ranking. Nothing much more on the website apart from some recommendations of some interesting data sets that can help you start modeling and predicting down here at the bottom.
Thanks very much, Ben. So we've got a list of 200 and something
206.
206 Olympic committees, not countries necessarily, that people have got to put in order. And so, like I say, our hope is that actually this is quite accessible. So we're hoping that some school students might get involved as well, because though we've hinted a little bit before in our speakers' discussions, and we'll talk about later, you can get very advanced in how you're thinking about these things. But at the end of the day, it's just about putting things in order. So you can use no method whatsoever and just your gut instinct, which interestingly, some of the participants are saying they want to try and get that sort of information into their models. So it would be interesting to see how those kind of statistical versus gut instinct approaches work. Anyway, thanks, Ben. So as Ben mentioned, the prize is to be invited to speak at the RSS International Conference, which this year is in Brighton. Very excitingly, there's going to be, so the conference takes place over a number of days, but on the day when our speakers will be telling us all about their fantastic approaches, whether or not it was statistically intensive or guesswork, we'll see. So that day will be one session that's part of a full day, a full program of sports-related content. So we would encourage everybody to attend the RSS conference, especially that particular day. And that day, including this competition, is sponsored by Amelco. So if you are, as I say, one of our fantastic winners, you'll get a free day pass. So the RSS will give you a free day pass to that day of the conference, the sports day. And then Amelco are also helping with those expenses as well for UK participants. So there's that's the prize for the winners. Fantastic prize. Getting to attend the conference and your expenses paid. So absolutely fantastic prize. We'd like to hear from a representative from Amelco to tell you a little bit about their company.
Thanks, Tess. Yeah, super excited to be involved this year. I've looked on with envious eyes over the last couple of years at the RSS conference, and it seems to be coming on leaps and bounds in terms of more and more sports-related topics, discussions, workshops, etc. So yeah, super excited, and think the timing's great for Amelco to come in as a sponsor for the sports-specific day. My name is Mark Hill, Director of Trading with Amelco UK, based in London. And we're a software and platform provider predominantly for the sports betting industry, although we started out in the financial industry back in 2006 originally. Over the last number of years, for anyone who's not familiar with the way the industry has been developing, we had PASPA repealed in the United States, and as part of that, there was a massive growth of the regulated market in North America. So we weren't just sports betting in Nevada or Las Vegas specifically, or New Jersey. You were now able to bet in multiple regulated states. And as part of that growth, we provide a platform we're the platform provider for a couple of tier 1 operators in Hard Rock Digital and Fanatics out in North America. But beyond that, we've done sportsbook solutions for companies in, let's say, North America, Europe, UK and Ireland, Africa, Asia. So quite an extensive mix of jurisdictions that we've been in. We have done a good job over the last number of years of being an end-to-end solution for everything from your PAM, which is your player account management system, to the sportsbook, obviously, casino, lottery, lots of different facets, but become over-reliant on third-party integrations for our pricing and our modeling aspect. So what we've set about as a company over the last 6 months is to really target how do we get back to doing the bread and butter pricing, modeling, and the statistical solution ourselves in-house. So first protocol with that was to identify someone to lead up and incubate a new team for Amelco, which we're delighted to bring Milt Mavrakakis on board from Smart Odds. And Milt will come into us in August time, and then we'll incubate a new quant development team under Milt, and that they'll be tasked with multiple facets within the sports betting industry. It could be everything from modeling a core sport to the bet builder products to micro betting, which is your sort of play-by-play or pitch-by-pitch type markets, right through to cash-out algorithms and other elements that touch mathematical or statistical nuances. That it's one thing to say we're a platform provider, but we've got to get the math right behind the individual solutions that we provide. So really, really exciting time for Amelco, and really, really exciting time to come on board with yourselves as well.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So hopefully by this point in the webinar, people understand sort of the history of our prediction competitions, where we've been and what we're doing this year. So just to finish off, we thought it would be a nice thing to have a panel discussion with our sponsors. So as we've been hearing, professionals who model and statistically analyse sports, and our competition winners as well. Okay, thanks for that, Mark. And you were saying there about you're sort of building a new team. So do you want to say any more about that?
Sure, and looking at the caliber of candidates and people who have had applied to do the test over the last number of years, it perfectly fits with what we're trying to put together in Milt's team. So yeah, we are openly looking for applicants at the minute. We're going to put some adverts up on the amelco.co.uk website very, very soon. But in the meantime, feel free to reach out to myself on LinkedIn. You can find me as Mark Hill or mhill@amelco.co.uk. Interested in wide range of applicants. So Milt's team will form number of different senior positions, junior positions, but very much an exciting project where we're looking for strong mathematical basis and backgrounds to the candidates, but with an active interest in sports, and sports betting in particular is very welcomed as well. So more than happy to get contacted on those mediums.
Brilliant, thanks. And like I said before, so you're sponsoring that sports day at the conference, and you're sponsoring this competition. So people will see there's links on the competition website. There'll be links in this YouTube video at the bottom to the Amelco website. So if people want to find out more, that link should be there for them. Right, brilliant. Thank you very much. So as I say, we'll move on to the next part, which is a panel discussion with our sponsors and our previous winners. Right, thanks to everyone for those fantastic presentations. We'll move on to the panel discussion now. First question then. A lot of you talked about the home advantage and how you built that into your submissions last year. So my first question is, can you compare and contrast how home advantage was used within each competition? Because we've done men's and women's international football, tennis, and then now Olympics. So we'll start with Reuven. You talked a little bit about home advantage. Do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I can kick off, although I haven't participated in the previous competition, so I cannot compare women's and men's football. So what we thought about when we were initiating this project is that the home advantage might be different, because I don't know how it is in England, but at least in Germany, for example, women's teams play also in different stadiums, which doesn't take place in men's football. So, for example, if there is an international break in men's football, then often women's football go to the big stadiums, which is obviously another home effect than playing in front of, like, I don't know, 1,000 people or something like that. So it is a little bit more tricky, I think, in women's football when you compare it to men's football. And when we then go over to the Olympics, I think it's even more special, because I remember one paper by Alex Kuma, who was investigating performance under pressure in biathlon. And he said that for tasks which you have to be very focused, a home advantage can be a disadvantage. So because you have like pressure, and it's not like in football where everyone is pushing you, but you have to concentrate, and the pressure could have an effect on the concentration, which he found. So one has to disentangle maybe a little bit in the Olympics what sports are like sports which need concentration more, and what sports need more like push from the fans. So I think it's definitely more complex, the home advantage for this competition now.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks. Really interesting. So if you're taking the approach that so many approaches to the latest competition, but Cato was discussing about, if you're thinking about who's going to win the medals for each of the competitions, then like you say, maybe you have to think about specific home advantages or disadvantages for each event. Brilliant. Thanks a lot. And yeah, they do play like that in different stadia in England. So yeah, that's the similar. Matt, you kind of, so I think I remember this correctly. So you were kind of adding in a home advantage based on also a paper you'd read. So I wondered, when you were talking again, was there any differences between what that might look like from men's football to women's football, or was that on general sports and so on? So anyway, Matt, any thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, so I actually just took a statistic. I think it was a paper trained on men's football, just kind of assuming that the effects would be similar. But I think what Reuven says about the fact, maybe either playing in front of smaller crowds or playing in a big range of stadiums may well have had an effect there. Although I think there's something like an international tournament, I think it is more similar between the men and the women. You're still kind of, the away teams have got the disadvantage of coming to another country and settling in and all of those things. I guess with the Olympics, it's particularly interesting because not only do you have the fans kind of on side, but also generally countries invest more in their Olympic program in the run up to hosting the Olympics. So you've kind of got that double effect, which you wouldn't necessarily have in football, for example. It's not like West Ham are going to buy a player just because they're playing at home on the weekend. So yeah, I think modeling home advantage, especially as there's so much evidence for like home teams in the Olympics doing much better than when they're not the home teams. Like, that will be very important.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. So I think I don't want to. I'm going to tease. We've got a webinar coming up where somebody's going to talk about hints and tips about predicting medals tables. And something that you might see is, like you're saying, if there is investment, if a country is hosting an Olympics, there is investment in the lead up to that. So you actually see them doing well in the Olympics before they're going to host it as well, and that's due to the investment and things like that. Again, one of the things maybe in the research about home advantage is about home familiarity. So that's, they're all living in the Olympic Village, aren't they, and things like that. So in a sense, even though it's happening in France and you're French, you're still not in your own bed in the same way that somebody else isn't. Thanks. And Tom, Again, you mentioned a little bit about home advantage and again, international tournaments and neutral venues and things like that. So anything to add?
Yeah, so I think yeah, the thing that stuck out to me most was that whereas in football and things you can't change your team size because you're the home team, whereas I know that there's no limits on team size, but you would expect a larger participation of the home nation, in line with what Matt said about increased investment. And so yeah, you can have factors like larger team size and how that corresponds to a larger medal or not possibly. And then on the home advantage as well, there was a number of sessions at the conference last year talking about the home advantage manifested by influencing officials in terms of their decisions on a match. And there's a lot of sports that are quite, I would have thought would be more objective, things like javelin and stuff. There's a set distance, you measure it. It's pretty cut and dry. But then things like diving, certain there's lots of events where it is purely kind of subjective, and how the home advantage correlates to those, I don't know. But that's I think it will have a different impact within different sports. And you then got the combined effect of like some of those sports having a much larger medal tally within them and things. So how important it is in predicting the overall medal table, I'm not sure. I need to kind of look through the events and sort of start tallying up, how many fall under these kind of subjective sort of marking schemes versus the more objective ones, and maybe if you are going down a per sport or per category thing, I'd consider it at that level, definitely, as to which sports it's going to have most influence on.
Brilliant, thank you. And then Milt, Mark, have you got anything to add to this?
Yeah, so from when you first proposed the Olympic medal, the ranking table as like what the competition was going to be based on, I thought, well, there were two completely different ways to approach this. I think that immediately spring to mind, and I'm wondering which of the two would be more successful, and I'm also wondering whether it's possible to blend the two. So I guess you could approach this in a completely sort of a bottom-up way, just building up from the ground up, essentially looking at if not individual competitions leading to medals, not necessarily that granular, but certainly at the level of disciplines. So you can look, for example, you can look at particular sports, you can look at, let's say, track and field, you can look at gymnastics, you can look at things like that, where the advantage of building it from the bottom up is that you've got a lot more data that you can use. Obviously, apart from previous Olympics, you can look at what happened at, let's say, world athletics competitions, or what happened at what happened in the basketball World Cup, what happened in all of these different things. So you've got all of these different things to work with to try to build something, essentially to come up with a probabilistic prediction within each, if not within each sport, certainly within each discipline, and try to build it up that way. But then I thought, well, I'm wondering if you would do better going for a completely top-down approach. So essentially modeling the ranking directly, because you've got a few advantages there. Like, for example, you can capture long-term trends, because when a country starts to invest more let's say in grassroots sports, this is something that the effect of that is not immediate, it's gradual, and you can sort of see the countries which over the years are going up and up and up in the medals table, and obviously the countries that are going down. So the other advantage you have there is that just from looking around the internet for a few minutes, you will find a lot of different forecasts for the medal table that different organizations, different companies have made. And also, if you dig a bit more, you can find ones for previous Olympics. So I'm wondering if a weighted poll of polls approach, if you will, would work quite well in this context. And I wouldn't be surprised if something relatively naive like that ended up doing better than the more granular approach. Like it's not at all obvious to me which of the two would work better here. So I guess that's my that's my contribution. I don't know.
That's good. So the second option that you've just mentioned, that would have been the way I would have thought to do it first. So
yeah,
relatively naive. We shall see. Mark, do you want to come in and add anything?
Yeah, I think all the guys make extremely valid points, and I think I've touched upon it before, the nuances of trying to model this compared to what are relatively efficient markets in Wimbledon at tennis, the Euros, the Women's World Cup. There's a lot of market data there available and a lot of structured data available around how to go about tackling the task. On the home advantage specifically, I think you only have to look at the last number of games closer to home. At the Team GB had a 52.5% increase in gold medals. Japan, 125% increase in gold medals. Brazil, they were the outlier, only a moderate increase in gold medals. In general medal haul of 12%, but gold medals, they still managed to raise the bar up to 7 from 3. So trying to identify, participation size and team size is going to be one factor. Another element is that each of the Olympic committees can sort of have an influence when they're the host nation on some of the sports that come in and out of the Olympic Games as well. So Japan last time out had very Japanese orientated events. They had baseball and softball, which is no longer in the Olympics. They had golf with Hideki Matsuyama coming off winning the Masters type scenario. They were hosting the golf. That's gone out of this year's Olympic. Karate, which is synonymous with Japan as well. This year, we're getting surfing being reintroduced and probably more competitions added around surfing, climbing, and breakdancing. Now, how are you going to go about modeling who's going to win the breakdancing competition versus baseball, which has, a 2 or 3 competitors that can really go and win the gold medal there? So yeah, fascinating challenge overall, and there is undoubtedly a home advantage, but how you quantify it, I will leave it up to you guys.
That is, so the home advantage for hosting an Olympics, like you say, is so multifaceted because you do have control over what events are going to be in it to some extent, and also you do get automatic qualification for some things. I know with the women's football, when I was watching it, they were saying things like, "Oh well, if France do this, they're already qualified for the Olympics, so that would free up that space, as hosts." So yeah, so much to it. I was listening to a talk the other day where somebody was saying that when in London 2012, so Team GB Cycling had done lots of research and found like an optimal temperature to have the velodrome that gets the fastest speeds. So they'd been training in those conditions, and then because it was London 2012, they could say, "You want to set the thermostat at this? That's how we've been training." So there are little things like that as well by hosting it that you're going to get tiny home advantages. But as they said in Team GB Cycling, marginal gains. Brill, thanks a lot. I'm gonna kind of go a little bit different now because we've sort of gone there already. So we've sort of started already thinking about this next competition. So we've heard from Milt, sort of a couple of approaches that we could go with. So I'm interested in our previous winners' insights. Have we got any ideas about any hints and tips, secrets to success for perhaps this upcoming competition? So Matt, I'll start with you. Reveal as much as you want to reveal.
Yeah, I think with all of these things, my biggest tip would be you've got to play the metric and not try and make the most sensible ranking. Like, it would be very tempting to just kind of, literally give your best guess as to what the ranking will be. And in some sense, that's like the satisfying way to play the game. But that may well not score best on the metric. You want to work out, if it's even possible, work out what the probability distribution, sample lots of possible ranks from your model, and then choose the ranks that you submit to the RSS to be the one that gets you the best score on average. And so, yeah, I would probably spend quite a lot of my time thinking about how to not game the system. That feels that doesn't feel quite right, but essentially game the system in order to, rather than kind of necessarily thinking about what do I actually think is going to happen in the Olympics, or how can I model that?
That's interesting, and that does pick up on what Ben was saying about this competition, that we've switched things up a lot, so a completely different way of looking at things, exactly to what you're saying, so that you have to maybe think about things in a different way. Brill, thanks for that. Tom, any top secret tips you can give us?
Yeah, so I agree. Like the metric is interesting this year, and from my kind of just initial gut feeling about it, I think probably the bottom of end of the table is going to be just as important, if not more so than the top. So, I think if you get, say, USA, China the wrong way round, I think you're going to get less of a penalty than if you've got, that one rogue gold medal down the table that pushes one team. Because if everyone's equal, that cancels out. So I'm going to be looking for, those competitors, a small nation that's not competed before, but they've got, world class, play pigeon shoot, whatever it is, like that one medal could be pushing somebody up. So that's where I think there's a lot of points to be gained, and some of those may be tricky because it might be a nation that's has no Olympics history or something like that. A lot of previous data may not capture that. So, and something I picked up from the last competition is those reading around as to the real state of the Olympics and stuff going into it. I think could be really valuable this time.
Yeah, absolutely right. So I was having a look at the website with Ben's put in last time's medals table to test things, and like you say, it goes from kind of 92nd position to like 200 and something because there's so many tied on one gold medal or something. So I think you're absolutely right. These countries where there's one person who's their whole medal hope, whether they get a gold or a silver, is really going to jump you up and down the table. Because maybe just having a quick segue to Ben, that's how we've decided to do it, isn't it? The medals table that you'll see on the BBC and all those things. So it's golds first, and so on. Do you want to just explain a bit how the medals table works, Ben?
Oh, well, you guys have got it completely right. And Tom's insight, I think, is valuable and ought to be sort of taken into account by everyone. The scores aren't weighted so that say, positions 1 and 2 are more important than 91 and 92. And these are big jumps. People can't make little minor tweaks like they did with you before. With previous competitions where you're entering a probability, you can tweak your probability by 0.0 or by epsilon, right? By the tiniest amount. Here you've got to sort of be a bit bold, move your rankings by discrete chunks that could have huge impact. If you put your country, say Tanzania gets 1 medal rather than say 0 medals, and that puts them above 50 countries that they would otherwise be tied on, you then jump up by 50 points. So it'd be interesting to see it turns out. Maybe we should have weighted it more for the top places, but I think it's a bit too late to alter the rules now.
Milk,
Ben,
did you have something to say?
I was going to before you jumped in, I was going to congratulate you on coming up with this scoring system of not basing it on medal count, but rather on order, because that makes it. I think that's going to make the competition vicious on a completely different level.
Hopefully it doesn't wipe out the skill, because I guess it maybe introduces a bit more fluke into the game, which is fun, but hopefully it doesn't wipe out the skill of the competitors.
Ruben?
Yeah, so I totally agree to what has been said. What I think is important, because I think we are all a little bit unknown to what is happening really. So what you have to do is to really play around with your models and the data from the last Olympics and see what happens if I tweak my model that way, and what is the ranking I get, and maybe also for the last and the second to last, because I mean there is a lot of chance in this ranking, and I think you have to get a feeling for what is my model doing and what should it do and what is the best model, because as you already said, the prediction is so in another manner than predicting a World Cup with probabilities. So but I think it's interesting, and I think also if I look into the academic literature, it's not that it has not been done that often than, for example, predicting a World Cup or something like that. So it's some kind of new and
I mean, we're statisticians who want to get some signal from the noise, and well, it's interesting.
Yep. So this is great. What you're all picking up on is kind of two things that we really hoped in this competition. So as always, there's an overall winner, and that's fantastic. And that person could be a school pupil who's decided to put them in an order and not really use anything other than their gut instinct. Or that could be somebody who, like we're saying, has maybe modelled every single event at the Olympics and built it up that way. So that'll be the person who wins, and that'll be great. But remember, the prizes of presenting at the conference are also based on your methods. So like Ben says, right, there could be a winner that is somebody who's just gone gut instinct, but the people presenting, we're looking for people who've taken some kind of statistical approach, as Ruben's saying, that we'd like to hear more about. So hopefully that means it's open to everyone and lots of people can interact with it. Okay, couple of things then. I suppose I've just sort of mentioned it then. So, and a few of you mentioned this in your presentations. There was manual tweaks to models that we might make, or like we're saying this idea. A few of you mentioned this, that you had some kind of instinct yourself that you wanted to include. So yeah, maybe around that and this new competition, what do we think in terms of gut instinct people versus people taking a statistical approach? But then I suppose even in the statistical approach, you can still have manual tweaks and you can still go in there and add things. So again, I know a couple of you said things about this. So Tom, we'll start with you. I think you had a few of these gut instinct tweaks that you wanted to do in your entry.
Yeah, so I don't know what those tweaks are just yet, but I think it's making an allowance for them. Like the bulk of the work, will be done with there's too many countries to sort of to go and tweak each of them individually. I think a lot of them, like the big leaders, I'm going to be pretty happy. Just also because the medal tallies, then you get to the point where individual medals and stuff have probably less importance on the overall ranking. But I think it's looking through for those at the smaller side of the Olympic committees as to, are there individuals who are almost dead certs for particular medals and things like that, especially in instances, I think, with Olympic history, as countries change and committees come and go, the data isn't always there, and tying sort of different groups back together will be a challenge as part of this. But I think, there could be instances where the model has, I think it was Matt's entry this year where, countries that had very few records could sometimes throw models. This especially, there might be countries that have no prior history whatsoever that are, could be have a high probability for particular medals, which would be enough to bump them out of that, the 93rd place where everybody's on zero. So I think that's what I'm going to be looking for, and allowing those kind of individual hero stories to override a model that has no concept of that.
Brill, thanks. Mark, what about the professional world? How much is there between statistical analysis, modeling, and then a human aspect coming in and tweaking things? Again, is that different between something like we've just been saying before, football, where there might be lots of data, and something like the Olympics, where it's a bit more sparse?
Massively. I would put, to a degree, the Olympics on a par with the likes of predicting Eurovision. There's a lot of subjectivity around. And yes, if you drill into the granular data, there's a lot of opportunity there. It probably benefits the punter or the end better more than it benefits the sportsbook. The expectation on a sportsbook is you have to price as many markets as possible, whereas the punter side is you can pick and choose your spots. So if you model one particular country very well or one particular sport very well at a granular level, yes, the liquidity is going to be less, less opportunity to get high volume bets on it, but you are going to be able to expose some very weak pricing, will we say, compared to the likes of the previous competitions with the Euros, Wimbledon, the Women's World Cup. Every sportsbook is pricing that, and every sportsbook is pricing that with a lot of the derivative markets associated with that. On the Olympics competition, if you look at just the UK sportsbook as of today, we're a couple of months, or well, we're about what are we out 6 weeks, 5-6 weeks out from the tournament. There's, if you look at the likes of Oddschecker UK at the minute, there's only 3 books that actually have the over/under priced up for medals for the big nations. Is someone going to factor that into their modeling or equation in the next few weeks when they're only really going to get that subset of maybe 10 nations? Are they going to go to the extent that they then, okay, I know the South African sportsbooks might price the African markets a bit more than the UK would. There's no obvious market maker. Whereas for football, tennis, gospel is what Pinnacle's price is fairly reflective of the efficient market price. That just simply does not exist in the Olympics. There's no obvious market maker. People will try to copy each other, and it's a very, very inefficient market overall. So lots of advantage to the end better and the people that can model it efficiently. From a sportsbook perspective, it's mainly about being perceived to have the product out there, but at very low limits in comparison to the likes of the Euros and Wimbledon and competitions like that.
Mills, I'm just going to bring you in on that one. So we've talked about this before, about how previous competitions, people have utilised betting odds to different levels. And actually, from our presentations we saw today, there was less of that with the Women's World Cup.
Absolutely.
More of that. So do you want to just talk a little bit about the history and how we might use this information?
I mean, I see it as a leveler, because especially if you look back, so not last year's competition, but 2 years ago on Wimbledon, like I think that looking at the people who entered and then the people who got in the top places in the Wimbledon competition, I think that if you didn't use the bookmakers' odds for the first round matchups, you were basically out. Like there were only people who did that had any chance of being like at the top half of the table, which was extreme. And then the winning entry, which I think was Maurice Burke that year, he figured out how to also how to blend the first round odds with the outright winner on odds and come up with a prediction that way, which was very clever. But that was one where leveraging the information in the market was by far and away the best way to do it, and no method from fundamentals, apart from I guess a very sophisticated model from fundamentals, would even come close, right? So here I think you have the exact opposite, and that's really, really nice, because even the fact that in this conversation, like I've heard 3-4 different distinct approaches to modeling this, I think is absolutely brilliant. Mark's point of looking for bookmakers in other continents who might price up some of those notes, I thought that was really good, because I hadn't thought of that at all. So it would be interesting to see who, if anyone, manages to get some predictive improvement by building in the market. But it's absolutely it's not obvious. It's not obvious at all. I'm very excited for this competition, as you can tell. It's going to be a bloodbath.
That's two. Reuben, so there's a few things there that we've been chatting about to bring you in on. So again, using bookmakers' odds with things, or manual tweaks, gut instinct, anything you want to add in those kind of areas?
Yeah, I would add this manual tweaks, because I think Tom scratched it, but I think it's difficult, because I mean you do not have one sport, but you have multiple sports. But we have to think of again that the bottom of the table is very important. So, for example, if you know that there is somebody who is injured, you should tweak it, because your model predicts, for example, that, I don't know, somebody like Usain Bolt in earlier times, he won every time the gold medal. He's now injured, so you should tweak the model, although your model said, okay, they will win the gold medal. So I think you have to read a lot if you do it that way, to the Olympics, to different competitions, to different sports, and using that for tweaking, because your model cannot include everything. And we have historical data, we have no future data. So this is where I would tweak in individual things, especially when it comes to countries not like the US or like China, Germany, UK, I don't know, there, as we already mentioned, it doesn't matter that much. But in this, like, let's say, little more concentrated countries on specific sports, I would tweak.
Excellent, thank you. And Matt, again, you were talking in your presentation about how, so a few things that we've already talked about. One, you were tweaking to kind of, in light of the way the scoring system was going to work, to kind of guard against things. So again, we've talked about how that's different this year. And what was really good about yours was you looked at how it would have panned out had you not done those things. So again, it's great for you to have the final word on this. So yeah, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I guess maybe one thing I learned from doing all of those tweaks was that you can, in some sense, tweak your model too much. And I know that there's one moment that's always stuck with me from predicting competitions. It wasn't an RSS competition. It was another one where I thought my model had run wrong because it predicted Scotland to lose against the Czech Republic with quite high probability, and I was like, nah, Scotland are going to win. So I overrode it. I typed in a different score into the prediction, and then the score that it predicted was obviously exactly the score that it did. In the end, it had run correctly, and I think learning from this competition, some of the changes that I made, like kind of clipping the probabilities, actually just made the score worse. And so there probably is an element of like trusting the model over your own intuition, which is always a battle I fight internally. But yes.
I was talking to some I'll keep them nameless, but they work for a bookmakers, and they were saying about you can bet on the the coin flip at the start of the Super Bowl, and loads of money went on heads or something like that. So that sort of the computer was saying change because the market's telling you that this probability of 50% that you've put on is incorrect, and they were saying, but we know it is 50-50, so we need to stick with that and not do it. And I think it's like you're saying there, because a coin flip, we sort of have that in our minds. That's right, we need to not take this into account. But with these models, when they're a bit more black box and it's spitting out Scotland losing, it's harder to leave it be. Anyway, thanks so much to everybody. I had loads of questions I wanted to ask you, but we're running out of time, so I think we'll have to leave it there. So Ben, I just want to, if this is okay, have some quick fire questions about that we've had submitted about competition specifics. So I'll try and go as quick as I can based on time. First one, the difference in the spelling of Turkey. So I think we'll just flag that up as how are we using it, and then flag it up to our competitors that if you're looking at historical data, you might need to be aware of those two spellings. So how are we spelling it this year, Ben?
In the template, I believe it is EY. It will only make a minor difference, but I think the published results this year will be IYE. But there will be some little differences between matching of countries, but we can sort of sort those out. They shouldn't provide too much of a problem.
Yep, good. But just giving people a warning there, if you're looking at data sets,
Yeah.
that could be something that's erroring in your code.
Yes.
Right, we've got things like Russia, Belarus, these individual neutral athletes, people competing under the Olympic banner.
Yes.
How's that treated in our predictions?
So, this needs to be ironed out, actually. So I'm not even entirely sure of the status of Russian athletes. Is it right that they're not competing under the Russian?
They're competing under a neutral Olympic Committee tag. So yeah, they are participating, but not under their own country's banners.
So
And
I
without
don't
appearing in the
believe.
rankings?
Not to be confused with the Refugee Olympic Committee as
Yeah.
well, which is another neutral one. But their official tag for the rankings would be the Neutrals Olympic Committee, NOC.
So I don't believe NOC is in our list of rankable of countries, Olympic committees.
Yep, that's what I thought. So actually, when we were designing this competition, we could have had any subset of the people participating. So we could have asked people to order 50 countries or so on. So actually, not having certain countries in, the competition will still work. So the moral of both these questions is just take a little look at the template for submission, and you'll see all you have to do is put those countries in order, being aware of how they're spelt and how they might be spelt in previous data sets.
Exactly. Thanks, Jess.
Brilliant. Okay, here's a question then. When will the winners be confirmed? Because if you think about it, we've seen this recently, sometimes medals get rescinded and this can
Yes.
change things dramatically. So when is
So
the winner confirmed?
I'm grateful for Kaito for pointing this out. Yeah, I hadn't taken this into account. So maybe we could decide now, as a sort of committee who sort of know approximately what they're talking about. What do you think? Do you think we should freeze things on the final day, or give it a little pause whilst because sometimes it takes a little while for these. I guess sometimes it takes months or years actually for these drugs related things to come out. The last
Tom's
day would
unmuted.
I was just gonna say, like, I quite enjoyed having the cap on the last competition, at knowing it ends at this, the final
Yeah.
match, and the end of the competition. The Olympics seems like a nice, you have to draw a line somewhere. I think medals have been rescinded like several Olympics after.
Yeah.
That that would be my vote.
Yeah.
So that
like
could
I
add
say,
to the
we've got two things. So as I say, the overall winner is just one of the prizes actually. And we've got methods that would be totally robust to this. So I'm going to say at the closing ceremony, when they extinguish that flame, whatever the medals table is at that moment, that's who the winners are. Because also remember, the prize is to speak at the RSS conference, which is in September.
Yeah.
And these things finish in August, so there's not a lot of turnaround time. So we're going to have to go for that one. But maybe we'll be sending out emails in like 7 years' time saying, you know what, Jess, you've just shot up into second place because we took that medal off.
In hindsight. Yeah, I like that. So we partly need to also account for who has the most sophisticated doping regime.
No comment. Brill. So that's all my quick fire questions. One last thing then before we finish. So I just want to thank everybody for their contributions today. They've all been absolutely fantastic. It's so interesting. I absolutely love these sessions. It's so interesting, and it's so great that we've got a record of those fantastic presentations that our winners gave last year. So just want to, before we say goodbye, just draw a few things to your attention. So we've got an upcoming webinar that we've referenced already. That's going to be 12 p.m. on the 15th of July. That's live. So if you're watching this before that date, please sign up and join us through the RSS website. If you're watching it after this date, there'll be a YouTube video for that webinar, so pop across and watch that one as well. We've set a deadline for the submissions slightly before the Olympic Games begin on Monday, the 22nd of July. So please get those entries in before that date so that we can make sure everything's working nicely. Just flagging up the website for this prediction competition again, that'll be in the comments section of this YouTube video, so please visit that website for lots of information and how to submit your entry. Of course, the most important date here, the Olympic Games actually start on Friday the 26th of July, so we're all getting really excited about that. And then, as you were just saying, the RSS conference is then the 2nd to the 5th of September, and the dedicated sports day where our winners will be presenting is on Thursday the 5th of September, and there's all sorts of sports related talks throughout the day. So if you're a winner, you'll be presenting there, and like we said, you'll get your free ticket and you'll get your expenses paid if you're in the UK, thanks to our sponsors and the RSS. But if you're not a winner, lots to come along for, so please get your tickets booked early because there are early bird offers. Right, that's everything from me. So thanks again to our speakers. Thanks for you for watching, and good luck to everybody here and watching with this competition.